The sun beat down on Fort Irwin without mercy. Lieutenant Susan Miller wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her tanned skin. The training exercise had been going for 6 hours in the California desert, and the temperature had climbed well past 110 degrees. "Water break," she called to her squad. They had been practicing desert warfare tactics, moving from shadow to shadow across the baking landscape. Her soldiers gathered around, gulping from their canteens. "How much longer, Lieutenant?" asked Private Joe Wilson, his face red and dripping. "Until we get it right," Susan replied with a small smile. "The enemy won't give us a break because we're hot." In truth, she was proud of them. They had performed well despite the brutal conditions. Her unit specialized in desert operations, and they were among the best. Susan had grown up in Arizona and knew the desert like an old friend, respected its dangers but understood its rhythms. The radio at her hip crackled. "All personnel return to base immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, all personnel return to base immediately." Susan frowned. They never cut training short. "Mount up," she ordered, and her team moved quickly to their vehicles. As they drove back to the main compound, Susan noticed something strange in the sky, a bright light that seemed to grow larger by the second. At first she thought it might be a helicopter or plane catching the sun, but it was moving too fast, descending too quickly. "What the hell is that?" Wilson asked from the passenger seat. The light became blindingly bright, forcing Susan to shield her eyes. When she looked again, an enormous object hovered above the base, a ship of some kind, but unlike anything she had ever seen. It was sleek and oval-shaped, with a metallic surface that shifted colors like oil on water. "I think," Susan said slowly, "that we're not alone anymore." 3 days later, Susan sat in a crowded briefing room at the Pentagon. Military leaders from around the world filled the seats, all talking in hushed, nervous tones. On the stage, the Secretary of Defense stood with a tall, strange figure. The alien called himself Ambassador Zexithal. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, with a body covered in scales that changed color with his movements. His face was lizard-like, but with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He represented the Krylaxians, an advanced species from a star system 40 light-years from Earth. "We have watched your planet for some time," Ambassador Zexthal said, his voice oddly musical despite the translator device he wore. "Your species has potential despite your many limitations." Susan felt a chill despite the stuffy room. There was something in the way he said limitations that bothered her. The meeting continued with talks of technology exchanges, cultural sharing, and potential alliance. The Krylaxians offered advanced medical knowledge, faster-than-light travel technology, and clean energy systems. In return, they wanted access to Earth's diverse biological resources and mining rights on several uninhabited planets in the solar system. It seemed too good to be true. And in Susan's experience, that usually meant it was. After the formal briefing, smaller groups broke off for specialized discussions. Susan found herself in a military exchange group with Captain Frank Rodriguez, whom she knew from a previous deployment. "What do you think?" she whispered to him as they waited for the alien military representatives. "I think they're sizing us up," Frank replied quietly. "Not as allies, but as conquests." Before Susan could respond, 3 Krylaxian military officers entered the room. They wore what appeared to be armor, though it moved like liquid around their bodies. The lead officer introduced himself as Commander Drezkor. "We wish to understand human military capabilities," he stated without any greeting. "Your weapons are primitive but interesting. Your tactics show creativity despite your physical limitations." "What limitations are those?" Susan asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. The commander's scales rippled with what she would later learn was amusement. "Your species is slow, weak, and inefficient compared to ours. You lack natural protection." He tapped his scales. "You require constant hydration and nutrition, and your temperature regulation system is particularly amusing." "Amusing?" Frank asked, his jaw tight. "You leak water from your skin," Drezkor said with a sound like stones grinding together. A Krylaxian laugh. How wasteful and primitive. Our bodies regulate temperature internally through specialized organs. We can function in environments that would kill your kind in hours. Susan felt her face grow hot with anger, but she kept her expression calm. Every adaptation has its purpose, she said. Our leaking has served us well for thousands of years. Perhaps, on your wet little world, another Krylaxian officer commented, but the galaxy is vast and often hostile. Species that cannot adapt, perish, or serve those who can. The implied threat was clear. Susan and Frank exchanged glances. Over the next few weeks, more Krylaxian ships arrived. They established a base on the moon and began joint operations with Earth militaries. But the more Susan interacted with them, the more concerned she became. During a demonstration of human desert warfare tactics, she overheard two Krylaxian officers speaking. Her translator picked up fragments, easily conquered and unsuited for defense. That evening, she met Frank at a secure location away from potential Krylaxian surveillance. They're planning something, she told him. All these joint exercises, they're testing our defenses, finding our weaknesses. Frank nodded grimly. Intelligence has intercepted some communications. They've done this before. 17 other worlds. They offer alliance, then find an excuse to establish a protective presence. Within a year, the planet is under their control. What can we do? Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Technology isn't everything, Frank said. They keep mocking our physical limitations, but every species has weaknesses. Susan thought about the Krylaxians' remarks about human sweating, how they found it primitive and inefficient. Their internal cooling systems, she said slowly. What about them? They must have limits. Every cooling system does. Susan leaned forward. Have you noticed they've avoided any exercises in extreme heat? All their conquered worlds have temperate climates similar to their home planet. Frank's eyes widened. You think they can't handle high temperatures? I think, Susan said, that we might find out what happens when their fancy internal cooling systems fail. And our primitive sweating might not seem so amusing then. As she spoke, a plan began to form. If the Krylaxians wanted to test humans, perhaps it was time for humans to test them back. 6 months passed since the Krylaxians arrived on Earth. Their ships now orbited the planet, and their bases dotted the surface. They called it a partnership, but Susan knew better. Every day, the aliens took more control, claiming it was for humanity's protection. Susan had been promoted to major after leading several successful joint training missions with the Krylaxians. This gave her access to higher-level meetings where she gathered information and looked for weaknesses in the aliens. One cool morning in Washington, D.C., she sat in a large conference room at the United Nations building. Ambassador Zexthal stood before the Security Council, his scales shimmering with blue and green patterns. We propose a military exercise, the ambassador announced, a show of good faith between our peoples. Susan leaned forward, interested despite her suspicion. We have discovered a new planet we call Pyrrhus, Zexthal continued. It has mountains and rocky plains similar to some regions on Earth. We suggest a terrain control exercise there. Each side will send 100 soldiers. The goal will be to capture and hold 3 strategic points for 24 Earth hours. The UN Secretary-General nodded thoughtfully. This seems reasonable. What are the conditions on this planet? It is habitable for both our species, though somewhat warm, the ambassador replied smoothly. The daytime temperature averages 130 of your Fahrenheit degrees. A murmur went through the room. Susan felt her heart beat faster. This was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for. General Patricia Howard, representing the Joint Chiefs of Staff, raised her hand. Ambassador, that temperature is extremely dangerous for humans without proper equipment and training. Is it? Zexthal's scales flickered with what Susan now recognized as amusement. How unfortunate. Perhaps this is too difficult for your forces. The trap was obvious. Refuse, and Earth would appear weak. Accept, and send soldiers into potentially deadly conditions. Susan caught General Howard's eye and nodded slightly. "We accept the challenge," General Howard stated firmly. "And we request that Major Susan Miller lead our team." The ambassador's scales rippled with surprise. "The leaking female? Very well." After the meeting, Susan met with General Howard in a secure room. "You know what they're doing?" the general said. "They want to demonstrate our weakness in extreme heat." "Yes," Susan agreed, "but I think they've made a mistake. They keep mocking our sweat glands, but they've never seen what humans can really do in the heat. You have 3 months to prepare," General Howard told her. "Pick your team and whatever equipment you need." Susan knew exactly who she wanted. First was Sergeant Alan Garcia, a desert survival expert who had grown up in New Mexico and spent years training troops in the hottest regions on Earth. Next was Dr. Olivia Wright, a scientist who specialized in human performance in extreme environments. They gathered at a special training facility in Death Valley. Outside, the temperature reached 120 degrees. Hot, but not as hot as Pyrrhus would be. "Here's what we know about the Krylaxians," Susan told her growing team. "They evolved on a temperate world similar to Earth's Pacific Northwest. Their internal cooling systems are efficient, but have never been pushed to their limits. All 17 worlds they've conquered have mild climates," Dr. Wright nodded. "Their cooling organs might be more advanced than our sweat glands in moderate heat, but every system has a breaking point. If we can push them past that point, they'll crash hard, and—" "We won't," asked Private Kelly Brown, one of the younger soldiers. "We will be right at our limits," Dr. Wright admitted. "But humans evolved as persistence hunters. Our ancestors would chase prey for hours in the heat until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. Our sweating allows us to keep going when other mammals shut down." Over the next weeks, the team trained harder than ever before. They worked in special heat chambers where the temperature climbed higher each day. They developed new cooling vests, hydration packs, and electrolyte mixes. They learned to pace themselves to conserve energy while still completing their missions. Susan drove them hard but fair. "The Krylaxians think we're weak," she told them during a particularly brutal session. "They think our sweating is wasteful and primitive. Let's show them what primitive can do." 2 months into training, Captain Frank Rodriguez visited their facility. Now working in military intelligence, he brought troubling news. "We've intercepted communications between the Krylaxian ships," he told Susan as they walked along the edge of the training grounds. "This exercise isn't just a test. They're planning to use it as proof that humans need their protection." "Protection?" Susan asked. "If we fail," Frank explained, "they'll claim it shows we can't survive in harsh environments. They'll use it to justify a full military occupation of Earth. For our own good, of course." Susan stopped walking and looked out at her team running drills in the baking heat. They were stronger now. Their bodies adapted to conditions that would have killed them 3 months ago. "They won't fail," she said firmly. A week before departure, Dr. Wright presented their secret weapon, a special compound that would make the Krylaxians sweat. "It won't work exactly like human sweating," she explained, showing them a small spray bottle. "But it will disrupt their internal cooling systems, forcing their bodies to release heat through their skin. The effect will be temporary but devastating in those temperatures." "Is it dangerous?" Susan asked. "No more dangerous than what happens to humans with heat stroke," Dr. Wright replied. "They'll recover once they cool down. But it will show them that their superior biology isn't so superior after all." Susan looked at the bottle thoughtfully. "We'll only use it if necessary. First, let's see if the heat alone is enough." The night before they left for Pyrrhus, Susan couldn't sleep. She walked outside, looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there was a planet where her team would face the greatest challenge of their lives. Frank found her there, his face serious in the moonlight. "The entire world is watching, Susan. Not just our world. 17 others that the Krylaxians have conquered." "No pressure, then," she said with a grim smile. "If you succeed," Frank continued, "you might do more than just win an exercise. You might show the galaxy that humans aren't as weak as the Krylaxians claim." Susan nodded, her determination growing stronger. "They ridiculed our sweat glands," she said softly. Let's make them regret it. The day of departure arrived. Susan and her team of 99 soldiers gathered at the Krylaxian transport site in Nevada. Each person carried special gear designed for the extreme heat they would face. They wore lightweight cooling vests under their uniforms and carried advanced hydration packs that recycled body fluids to reduce water loss. Ambassador Zexthal watched them with what appeared to be amusement. His scales rippled in patterns of gold and red as he approached Susan. "Major Miller, I admire your courage, though perhaps not your wisdom," he said. "Pyrrhus will test your species to its limits." "We look forward to the challenge, Ambassador," Susan replied calmly. "Perhaps we'll both learn something." The Krylaxian transport ship was enormous, with smooth walls that seemed to shift and move as if alive. Inside, the air was cool and dry. The human team sat in silence as the ship lifted off. Through small windows, they watched Earth grow smaller until it was just a blue dot in the darkness. "I never thought I'd go to another planet," whispered Private Kelly Brown, sitting next to Susan. "Do you think we can really win this?" Susan nodded firmly. "We're not just fighting for a victory in some exercise. We're fighting for Earth. Remember that." The journey took 3 days. The humans spent most of that time resting and preparing. Dr. Wright checked their equipment and ran final tests on everyone's health. Sergeant Garcia reviewed the terrain maps they had been given, looking for advantages. "The Krylaxians have mapped 3 target locations," he told Susan, pointing to a digital display. "All are on exposed ridges with little natural shade. They clearly expect the heat to work in their favor." "Then we'll make it work in ours," Susan replied. On the final day, Commander Kresvor, the Krylaxian military leader, called Susan to the ship's bridge. Through the main window she could see Pyrrhus growing larger, a dusty orange world with thin clouds and vast rocky plains. "Our rules are simple," the commander said. "Each team must capture and hold the 3 marked locations for 24 of your Earth hours. We will start at opposite sides of the target zone. No lethal weapons will be used. This is a demonstration, not a war." His scales shifted to a deep blue. "Though perhaps it will determine if war is necessary." Susan kept her face neutral, though her heart pounded. "We understand the rules. May the best team win." "We will," Kresvor said confidently. The ship landed, in a flat area surrounded by jagged rocks. When the doors opened, a blast of heat hit Susan like a physical force. The thermometer on her wrist immediately registered 115 degrees, and it was only morning. The human team exited first. They would have 6 hours to move into position before the exercise officially began. The Krylaxians would land at their own starting point on the opposite side of the target zone. "Remember your training?" Susan told her team as they gathered, in the shadow of the ship. "Pace yourselves. Conserve water. Work in pairs. We've trained for this." They haven't. The landscape of Pyrrhus was harsh and alien. The ground was covered in reddish stones that reflected heat back into the air. Strange twisted plants grew in cracks between rocks, their leaves tough and waxy. The sky was a pale orange, with 2 small moons visible despite the daylight. Susan checked her map and pointed to a cluster of large boulders about 2 miles away. "We'll establish our base there. Teams 1 and 2 secure the perimeter. Teams 3 and 4 set up the cooling stations. Medical teams stand by for heat casualties." They moved out in formation, walking steadily but not rushing. Every few minutes, they stopped for quick water breaks. Susan watched her team carefully, looking for signs of heat stress. Despite the brutal conditions, they were holding up well. By midday, the temperature had climbed to 130 degrees. The human base was established, with cooling tents set up in the shadows of the boulders. Each soldier rotated through these tents, on a strict schedule, cooling down before returning to duty. "The Krylaxians have reached their landing site," reported Sergeant Garcia, who was monitoring their communications. "They're moving fast, much faster than us." Susan nodded. "Let them. Speed generates heat. They'll cook themselves from the inside if they keep that pace." As the afternoon wore on, the temperature continued to rise. It hit 140 degrees, then 145. The cooling tents worked overtime, and every human was now sweating heavily, their uniforms dark with moisture. Dr. Wright moved among the soldiers, checking vital signs. "We're at the edge of human tolerance," she told Susan quietly. "But we're holding. The cooling vests are working and our acclimatization training is paying off." "And the Krylaxians?" Susan asked. Dr. Wright smiled slightly. "Our scouts report they're starting to slow down. Their movements are becoming less coordinated. I think their internal cooling systems are struggling." Susan called her team leaders together. "It's time to move on the first target. We'll use leapfrog tactics. One team moves while the others rest in whatever shade they can find. Slow and steady." The first target was a hill topped with a strange, pillar-like rock formation. As Susan's team approached, they spotted Krylaxian soldiers already moving up the opposite slope. But something was wrong with the aliens. Their normally smooth, coordinated movements were jerky and uneven. Some had stopped entirely, sitting or lying on the hot ground. "They're overheating," Dr. Wright said, studying them through binoculars. "Their cooling systems can't handle this environment for prolonged periods." Susan ordered her first assault team forward. They moved steadily up the hill, taking advantage of every bit of shade. When they reached the top, they found only 3 Krylaxian soldiers there, all clearly struggling in the heat. Their scales had turned a dull gray color, and they moved sluggishly. The human team secured the position easily. They set up a small cooling station and reported back to Susan. "First target captured," Sergeant Garcia announced. "The Krylaxians are retreating." A cheer went up from the human soldiers, quickly silenced by Susan. "This is just the beginning," she warned. "They'll adapt their tactics. Stay focused." As the brutal day continued, Susan's prediction proved true. The Krylaxians regrouped and attacked the second target with renewed determination. But the humans were ready. They had positioned snipers with non-lethal stun weapons at key points, and they picked off the advancing aliens one by one. By sunset, with the temperature finally dropping below 130 degrees, the humans had captured 2 of the 3 targets. The Krylaxians held the third, but reports indicated they were struggling to maintain their position. In the main cooling tent, Susan met with her team leaders. Their faces were red and salt-crusted, but their eyes were bright with determination. "We're winning," Kelly Brown said in wonder. "We're actually beating them." "Don't celebrate yet," Susan cautioned. "Night will bring cooler temperatures. The Krylaxians will recover some of their strength. But so will we." She looked at each of them, in turn. "Tomorrow we finish this." Night fell on Pyrrhus, bringing a small relief from the heat. The temperature dropped to 110 degrees, still dangerously hot, but better than the daytime inferno. Susan ordered her team to rest in shifts, making sure everyone got at least 4 hours of sleep. From their base camp, they could see the lights of the Krylaxian position on the third target, a flat-topped hill about a mile away. Occasional movement suggested the aliens were regrouping and planning their next move. "They'll try to take back our positions at dawn," Sergeant Garcia predicted as he and Susan studied the map. "It's their best chance when the temperature is lowest." Susan nodded. "We'll be ready. Double the guards and make sure everyone drinks extra water before sunrise." As she walked through the camp checking on her soldiers, Susan felt a mix of pride and concern. They had performed incredibly well so far, but tomorrow would be even hotter according to their weather monitors. The human body could only take so much. Dr. Wright approached with her medical tablet. "I've been monitoring everyone's core temperature and hydration levels," she said. "Most are holding steady, but 5 soldiers are showing signs of dangerous heat stress. I've pulled them from duty." "Will they recover?" Susan asked. "Yes, with rest and cooling, but we'll be down to 95 effective fighters tomorrow." "And the Krylaxians?" Dr. Wright smiled slightly. "Our thermal scans show over 20 of them are completely incapacitated. Their body temperatures are dangerously high and their scales have lost all color. I believe their internal cooling systems have failed." This was better than Susan had hoped for. "Keep monitoring both sides. I want to know immediately if conditions change." A soft beep from her communication device interrupted them. It was a message from Commander Kresvor. Major Miller, the Krylaxian leader's voice sounded strained. I request a brief meeting at the neutral zone between our positions. Just you and me. Susan considered this. It could be a trap, but she doubted the Krylaxians would violate the rules of the exercise so openly. I'll meet you in 20 minutes, she replied. Garcia objected when she told him. It's too risky, let me go instead. No, Susan said firmly. This is between commanders, but keep a sniper watching, just in case. The neutral zone was a flat area between the two hills their forces occupied. Susan arrived first and waited, scanning the darkness. Soon, a tall figure approached from the Krylaxian side. Commander Kresvor looked different. His scales were dull and patchy, lacking their usual vibrant colors. He moved stiffly and his breathing seemed labored. Major, he greeted her, his voice rougher than before. Your forces have performed unexpectedly well. Thank you, Commander, Susan replied evenly. Your soldiers have shown great courage as well. Kresvor made a dismissive gesture. Let us speak honestly. This planet is more challenging than we anticipated. Several of my warriors are unwell. The heat is extreme, Susan acknowledged. We've had casualties too. Yet you hold two positions, to our one. The commander's eyes studied her face. How are your soft, wet bodies withstanding these conditions while my warriors fall? Susan considered her answer carefully. Our primitive cooling system has advantages in extreme heat. Our sweating allows us to release body heat continuously, without using much internal energy. Kresvor was silent for a moment. Our internal cooling is more efficient in normal conditions, but it requires energy, and in this heat. He didn't finish the thought. Different adaptations work better in different environments, Susan said. No species is superior in all conditions. Perhaps, the commander conceded. Tell me, Major Miller, do you know the real purpose of this exercise? Susan kept her face neutral. To test the capabilities of both our forces, I believe. Not exactly. This was to be a demonstration of your weakness, a justification for our protection of your planet. Kresvor's voice turned bitter. Ambassador Zexthal plans to use your defeat to convince your leaders to accept our full control. And now? Susan asked, though she already knew the answer. Now we face a problem. If we lose, it undermines our position. If we withdraw, it shows weakness. Susan considered the implications. The Krylaxians were looking for a way out without losing face. Perhaps we could agree to a draw, she suggested. Both sides performed admirably under extreme conditions. Kresvor's scales shifted slightly, showing a hint of their normal color. A diplomatic solution, but our forces must still hold at least as many positions as yours by the end of the exercise. Then you'll need to take one of our positions by tomorrow evening, Susan said, knowing it wouldn't happen. Yes, the commander agreed, though they both knew his forces were in no condition to mount an effective attack. We will do our best. They parted with a formal salute. As Susan walked back to her camp, she felt more confident than ever. The Krylaxians were looking for a way to save face, which meant they knew they were beaten. Dawn came with brutal swiftness. The temperature rose quickly, hitting 135 degrees before the sun was fully above the horizon. By mid-morning, it had reached 150 degrees, hotter than the previous day and near the absolute limit of what humans could survive, even with their special equipment. The Krylaxians launched an attack on the second position as predicted, but it was clearly half-hearted. Their movements were slow and uncoordinated, and the human defenders easily repelled them. They're just going through the motions, Sergeant Garcia reported. 3 of them collapsed during the attack. Their internal temperatures must be off the charts. Susan nodded. Keep our people rotating through the cooling stations. I want everyone drinking water every 15 minutes, no exceptions. By noon, the temperature had somehow climbed even higher, 155 degrees. The rocks were so hot they could burn through boot soles. The air shimmered with heat waves, making visibility poor beyond 100 yards. Dr. Wright approached Susan at the command post, her face grave beneath her cooling hood. We've got 10 more cases of heat exhaustion, Even with our preparation, we're reaching human limits. And the Krylaxians, much worse. Our sensors show almost no movement at their position. I think most of them are completely incapacitated. Susan made a decision. Prepare a medical team. We're going to offer assistance. Garcia looked shocked. Help them? After what they plan to do to Earth? We're not like them, Susan said firmly. And this isn't about winning anymore. It's about showing them who we really are. She sent a message to Commander Kresvor, offering medical aid. There was no response for several minutes, then a brief acknowledgement came through. The human medical team moved carefully toward the Krylaxian position, carrying cooling equipment and emergency supplies. Susan went with them, along with Dr. Wright and a small security detail. What they found shocked even Susan, who had expected bad conditions. The Krylaxians lay scattered across their camp, many unconscious. Their scales had turned an ashy gray, and their breathing was shallow. Only a handful remained on their feet, including Commander Kresvor, though he swayed as he stood. You see us at our worst, Major Miller, he said hoarsely. I see warriors who fought bravely, Susan replied. Let us help you. The commander hesitated, then nodded once. Your assistance is accepted. The human medical team worked quickly, setting up portable cooling units around the fallen Krylaxians. Dr. Wright directed her staff with calm efficiency, moving from one alien to another, checking vital signs and applying cooling treatments. Their body temperature is dangerously high, she told Susan after examining several patients. Their internal cooling systems have completely shut down. Without help, many would die. Susan watched as her soldiers, who just hours ago had been fighting these aliens, now worked to save them. Private Kelly Brown helped a Krylaxian warrior drink water, while Sergeant Garcia rigged shade covers to block the merciless sun. Commander Kresvor sat on a rock, wrapped in cooling blankets. His scales had begun to show hints of color again as his temperature lowered. He watched the humans work with an unreadable expression. Why do you help us? He finally asked Susan. You could have won a complete victory. This isn't about winning anymore, Susan replied. If we let you die, what would that make us? The commander was silent for a long moment. Not what we thought you were, he admitted finally. As the afternoon wore on, more Krylaxians began to recover. The human medical treatments were working, though slowly. The official end time of the exercise came and passed without comment from either side. What had begun as a military challenge had turned into a rescue mission. Susan received a call on her communication device. It was from Earth, General Howard herself. Major Miller, we're receiving Krylaxian distress signals. What's happening? Up there? Susan explained the situation, how the extreme heat had overwhelmed the aliens' cooling systems, and how the human team had offered medical assistance. There was a pause before the general responded. You did the right thing, Major. The Krylaxian High Command is in an uproar. Ambassador Zexathal is demanding explanations from Commander Kresvor. The commander is in no condition to explain anything right now, Susan said. Tell the ambassador. If he wants a report, he can speak to me. Another pause. I'll relay that. Be careful, Susan. The political situation is changing by the minute down here. That evening, as the temperature finally began to drop, a new Krylaxian ship arrived. It landed near the human base camp, and Ambassador Zexthal emerged, flanked by guards. His scales were bright with agitation as he approached Susan. What is the meaning of this? He demanded. This exercise was meant to demonstrate human limitations. Susan stood her ground. It demonstrated limitations, certainly, just not the ones you expected. The ambassador's scales rippled with anger. Where is Commander Kresvor? I would speak with him. He's recovering with his troops, Susan said. My medical officer advised against moving him yet. Your medical officer? You dare to treat our warriors with your primitive methods? Dr. Wright stepped forward. Our primitive methods saved their lives, Ambassador. Your internal cooling systems failed catastrophically in this heat. Our wasteful sweating kept us functioning. Zexthal seemed about to argue further when a voice called from behind them. She speaks truth, Ambassador. Commander Kresvor approached slowly, still weak but walking unaided. His scales had regained much of their normal color. The humans have shown us something important, he continued. Their adaptation to heat is superior to ours. Without their help, I would have lost most of my force. The ambassador's scales flickered with confusion. This is not the outcome we planned for. Plans change when facts change, Kresvor replied. We were wrong about humans. Their primitive cooling system is remarkably effective in extreme conditions, and they showed mercy when they could have claimed victory. Susan watched this exchange with interest. The political dynamics among the Krylaxians were clearly shifting. She decided to press the advantage. Ambassador, this exercise has taught both our species valuable lessons. Perhaps we should reconsider the nature of our relationship. Zexthal turned to her sharply. What do you mean? I mean that true allies respect each other's strengths and help compensate for weaknesses, not look for excuses to control each other. The ambassador was silent, his scales cycling through patterns too quickly to interpret. Finally, he said, Your point is taken, Major Miller. We will reconsider certain aspects of our proposal to your planet. 2 days later, Susan and her team returned to Earth as heroes. The news of their success had spread worldwide, changing the narrative about the Krylaxian alliance. What had been presented as protection was now revealed as attempted control. In Washington, Susan briefed the Joint Chiefs and the President. General Howard smiled proudly as Susan described how her team had not only survived, but thrived in conditions that had crippled the supposedly superior aliens. The Krylaxians have withdrawn their proposal for a protective occupation, the President told Susan after her report. Instead, they're offering a true technology exchange. They want to learn about our desert survival techniques in exchange for their space travel technology. I believe that's a fair trade, Susan said. We both have something valuable to offer. 1 week later, Susan met with Commander Kresvor again, this time in a desert research facility in Arizona. The Krylaxian looked fully recovered, his scales bright with health. Major Miller, he greeted her with what she now recognized as respect. My scientists are eager to begin work with yours. Dr. Wright has assembled a top team, Susan replied. They believe we can develop cooling technology that combines the best of both our systems. They walked together through the facility, where Krylaxian and human scientists already worked side by side. Susan noticed that the aliens seemed fascinated by the simple spray bottles of water that humans use to cool themselves. You know, Kresvor said thoughtfully, our histories teach that advanced species always conquer primitive ones. It is the natural order. Maybe it's time for new histories, Susan suggested. The commander's scale shifted to a pattern she hadn't seen before, something contemplative, perhaps even humble. Yes, he agreed. New histories, where advancement is measured not by domination, but by adaptation, by finding strength in what others consider primitive. As they reached a window overlooking the desert, the commander gestured to the harsh landscape. We would never have chosen such a world to settle, yet your kind thrived here. Different environments require different strengths, Susan said. There are worlds where your adaptations would serve better than ours. Together we might conquer them all, Kresvor mused. Not conquer, Susan corrected gently. Explore. The commander's scales rippled with what she now recognized as amusement. Explore then, beginning with those 17 worlds we visited before yours. Susan smiled. The road ahead would be challenging, but a true alliance had begun. All because the Krylaxians had ridiculed human sweat glands until their soldiers fell victim to the heat.